Hi everyone, welcome. In this video, I want to talk about focus management, which usually gets a few people. So once you understand a few key concepts, it will help to um, add focus to your pages. So we're going to go through this example in the Solid Demo app of focus handling, and it's literally called focus handling. So if you go to the examples and focus handling, you'll see this little thing here. I made a few changes locally just to have a few more examples, but I'm going to go through this. Also, there's a lot of documentation on the Solid website. So if you want to understand focus handling, you can read through this. But in summary, like the big thing that you have to understand is there is one element that has focus at any given time, and that's called the active element. It's a global variable or global signal that stores whatever element is currently active. And from that active element, that creates a focus path, which is like all the parent elements also have focus or considered are in focus. And whenever that focus changes, you get blur events and new elements receiving focus. So let's go through this example here. And what we have is I have a column with 3 rows. So I'm actually moving, when I move up and down, the column is setting the row to a different background color, which is why we have that white. And then inside of the row, I can press right and left to switch between the different elements. So here I'm pressing right and left. And then additionally, I can press left, 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 and go over to this other element, and that created this transition, which covers up the page. So that's very similar to like how this is working, and that's what this demo is about. Is kind of showing kind of common practices of what you would be doing if you were building your own TMDB app. So let's go through the page and see how this works and how we can understand focus in this use case. And I will try to just slide this over so that if we need to still look at it, we can. Get rid of this. And so here, what we have is this is the positioning page, focus handling page, and we have a row. So we have a top level row, which allows us to switch between these two. So this thing and these other elements. And inside that row, we have a view with a column. So this column, these are the buttons here on the left. So they all have the same color, the side menu. And then on the right, we have another column with a row with the buttons at the top here, which I can't see those colors, but you get the point. Those are these 3 colors here. And they are a little off due to this color being applied, but I wanted to demonstrate that. So we have a column and we have 3 rows. So here's our 3 rows with 3 different button colors. And so again, just to understand this, let's just look at this one row. So we have a row which is handling focus between these 3 buttons. And the row does on left and on right handling. And so it has a property in there called selected. And selected is an index. It starts off with 0, but you can set it to 1, you can set it to 2, you can set it to whatever you want. And if I reload the page over here, now the element that's selected is this green one over here. So if I press left, I'm going back to the first one. So it starts out as 2, 1, 0. And then if I press left again, it's jumping to this other column. So let's kind of talk through that, right? So the row keeps track of the selected index internally. Again, the default is 0. And as I press left, what it's doing is it's getting its children and saying set focus on the button, set focus to the next button, etc. And then when it goes to the 0, when it's at selected 0 and you press left, what happens is it returns false because it's not handling the one left, and then the parent has to handle it. So this column only handles up and down, so this doesn't handle it. So then it bounces up to this row, which now this one is handling the left and right. And so this has the very same logic of what is selected is 1, and it will actually bounce to this other element. And actually, that's probably a very useful thing for me to do is set selected equal to 1, because that is the default, because the right side is what's selected. But what will happen now is we're pressing left, and now that row is what's changing focus now to this first element here. So the row sets focus on its first child. So this is where we get something interesting, is this forward focus. So what happens is if you have a child and you don't want that child to have focus, stop showing me my Git history. You don't want that child to have focus, you want it to forward focus to its child. So that's what this forward focus attribute does, is it says, I don't want this thing to receive focus. I want this column to receive focus. And so forward focus says, give focus to the first child element. Or you can set it to the second child element or the third child element. Whatever number you put here is the number of the child element that you want to receive focus. Alternatively, you can also have this be a function where you could just say, I don't want any of these things to set focus. I want my content.children sub 0 to set focus. So you can call set focus on any element you want. The benefit of using forward focus is when you call set focus on an element or when focus is changing, rather than doing all the blur events and the focus events, you can forward focus, which will change focus before all those functions are called. So it's definitely a performance optimization to use forward focus when you want it to be sent somewhere else rather than being sent to a parent element. So again, in this case, I want focus to be sent to the column. Column then also has a forward focus internally on it that sets it equal to the selected index. So it's setting it to one of these buttons, whichever one was selected before. Okay, so hopefully that all makes sense. Now we're going to go into some other pieces of this. So here we have the other column, and we have different properties that we can use to handle focus. So some things that happen when an element receives focus, we have an onFocus handler. So that's just a function callback that you get that you can add whatever you want in there. And then there's an onBlur. So when an element loses focus, onBlur gets called. And again, it has a callback handler, so you can see all the different things that are passed into it. The current element. Let's see if I can see all of this with the TypeScript definition. So you get the this property is the element that is losing focus. You get the current focused element, the previous focused element as well. So you get to know where focus changed to. So let's remove that. And then the other thing is this onFocus change handler. OnFocus change gets called onFocus and onBlur, and the first argument to it is a Boolean of true or false to say, does this element still have focus? And this is very useful for signals. So here I have set has focus, and so I can create a signal in this page that is set to false, and then I get a signal now has focus, so that whenever this column has focus, I can change the alpha from 1 to 0.1, or I can set any arbitrary attribute somewhere else in the page to a different value based on whether this element has focus or not. So hopefully you can see how that could be useful. This was just a contrived example to kind of show off the power of using onFocus change. Another thing that I didn't actually mention at the beginning was this autofocus. So autofocus is another property that when you first create an element, you can put autofocus on an element. And what happens is when that element is created, it will call set focus on this element. So when this page first reloads, column is getting focus on it. And then since that receives focus, it's doing its logic of forward focus, which sets focus on this row, which then forwards focus to the button. And so this button is what actually receives focus. So that is the first element that's receiving focus. I'm going to get rid of this alpha in case this is affecting some of the colors. Yeah, that was what was affecting the colors because it was alphaing out. But now we have the focus on the buttons, and we can move left and right, up and down, etc. So that was a lot of information about focus. One of the other things that I want to have is autofocus. There's two ways of using it. One, you can just put the attribute on there, and then when the page loads, it's going to call focus on that element. The other thing that you can do with this is autofocus can also take a signal. It doesn't have to be a has focus, but usually you want to set autofocus equal to like props.data.items. So if you have dynamic data coming in, let's not autocomplete that. Nope, it's not going to let me type that in without changing to something else. But you can put this equal to a signal, and that way if you had a for loop in here which was dynamically creating items, and those items were based on data that you were getting back, you can put the data in here so that when that signal changes, it's going to call set focus on this again after the data loads. And that way it will focus the buttons once the data becomes available and once these buttons are created. So that's a useful thing rather than trying to figure out how do I put autofocus on the first element in a column or row, which is normally what you want to do. Don't do that. Instead, just put autofocus on the parent on the row or column, and it will automatically set focus to the first element. Or you could do selected and make it set focus to the third element or fourth element, whatever you want. But those are some useful tips that I have for you. All right, we have even more to go through. So another piece is this selected index. You can see this kind of changing the row color based on which one's active. So a lot of times you have this, which is like you have your row and you want it to highlight to a different color once it becomes active. So one way of doing that is using the row and columns on selected changed. And this is a callback that the first value that passes in is the number of selected. So selected again is 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, whatever it is. We can have a signal. So this signal again is a number. So now we have selected index is a number of which row currently has focus. And then here, now we can do selected equals 0. And if it's 0, set the background color to this. Otherwise, set it to 1. And that is what is allowing us to change the background color on the rows as we go up and down. Because the selected index changes to another number, it's then updating the color, etc. Okay, one thing to note, rather than doing this, you're going to want to look at Solid.js's create selector, which is just another performance optimization, because right now, whenever selected index changes, it's going to recalculate all three of these. Create selector makes it so that it would only calculate the one or only update the node that actually changed versus making the callback on every single one of these. So that's just a little performance optimization you can make. And I think that's all that I want to cover in this video. That was hopefully a lot of information on handling focus, but I will leave you with one other tidbit, except that I know that that doesn't work yet. So there is a focus debug mode that you can set in the index page using the config, but there's currently a bug in the renderer, so it won't actually work. But if you had config.debug, actually there's config.focusDebug, and this will actually set a border around the elements that have focus. I'm waiting for a PR in the renderer to actually fix this because the renderer doesn't actually update the data attribute once things change. So hopefully once that's available, you can see a focus ring around the elements that have focus, which will make it a little easier for you to update and handle the focus. As always, like and subscribe, and feel free to leave comments in the channel so that I know what other videos you're looking forward to. Thanks and enjoy.